Hey YouTube, Awesome Writer here. Welcome to my third installment in this unofficial trilogy of ranking videos. I ranked all the Power Rangers series, I ranked all the Rider series from Heisei and Reiwa, and this one is going to be Sentai. It's a little bit different because, kind of like with Sentai, I guess there is like Heisei and Reiwa and Showa eras and stuff like that, but I don't think about that as much as I do with Rider for some reason. But also, I've seen a lot less of a concise block of Sentai, so this is going to be every Sentai I have seen ranked, and it's fairly simple. I have seen Jetman, which is only one season before Geky Ranger, where we started Power Rangers, through present, with the exception of Gingaman, Lightspeed Rescues Go-Go V, or 5, I always forget what it is, and then Time Ranger. So I thought about waiting to do this video until I watched those, but I didn't want to rush binge them, and I thought it would be fun to update it later when those are in there. Also, just a couple things, I am going to include King-ohger, even though we are not technically done yet. I feel like regardless of whether I waited for King-ohger to finish or not, it would have a very tentative placement because of recency bias, both like for and against it. Sometimes it'll have things ranking higher for recency bias, and other times it will rank lower than it will eventually, just because, you know, it can't break through that barrier of other series you're attached to yet. So I'm going to include it because I just figured one way or the other, King-ohger's ranking will probably change the next time I do this. And that last bit of business before we get on to, well, actually two last bits of business before we get on to this. Number one, disclaimer that I don't even know why I bother saying it, that this is just my opinion. This isn't the correct opinion. I didn't run a poll or algorithm. It's futile to say this because like so many people in the comment section don't seem to grasp the idea that everyone has a different brain. But just that disclaimer, everyone's got different tastes. The other one is, this isn't a disclaimer, but I wasn't sure whether to include this or not, which is Auber Ranger, so I'll just give my brief thoughts on it. Maybe I'll include it next time I rank this. But Auber Ranger is like the unofficial Sentai, but obviously it's not like, you know, Tokusatsu Gagaga, where it's inspired by, or it's not a fan film. Like, it's unofficial, but it is officially tied to Sentai and Toei, because obviously they could use their, you know, Sentai likenesses and stuff. And I'll just say, I really enjoyed Auber Ranger. I really enjoyed it a lot. It was a really fun, funny parody series with lots of great inside jokes for Sentai and Toku fans. And then within the first season became surprisingly dramatic as everything got really meta and crazy, which was kind of cool when they became self-aware. You know, I didn't like the second season as much. I did like the fun of it, but I felt story-wise they didn't need to dig it up. Kind of reminds me of how I felt about Kamen Rider Amazon, where I'm like, this should have just maybe been a one-season thing. I almost wish they could have taken some of the best creative bits from Season 2 and just put them in Season 1 as an extended cut, but unlike Amazon, though, I enjoyed both seasons. But let's get started now with the official ranking of every Sentai I've seen. Again, Jetman through present, with the exception of those three series, Gingaman, Go-Go V, and Time Ranger. So coming in at the bottom, possibly as a surprise to no one if you've followed me for a while, is Ninja. Ninja, you know, it very much so, like Ninja Steel, reminds me of the worst of the respective series. You know, there's just so much I don't like about it. You know, the plot's bare bones and generic. There is some kind of interesting stuff there with The Last Ninja, and I like the resolution of it, but for the most part, I felt like the framework of it was very generic and I wasn't engaged. The filler was often useless and annoying. I didn't really care for the cast. I think the only characters I really liked was Kasumi and then their dad, because like I thought it was kind of a cool character that he didn't get to become a ninja and then he kind of does later. But otherwise, I just wasn't a fan of the cast, especially Takaharu, who, you guys know, I think my least favorite character type in history is an obnoxious Toku lead character, whether it's a writer or a Sentai Red or whatever. And Takaharu's got to be one of the worst ones, because even if I don't like that type of character, at least most of the time when you have that character, the performer seems committed to it and like they're giving a good performance, but this just felt so weirdly muted. Like when he said his catchphrase, it felt like it was restrained and weird, and I just didn't like this series, which is unfortunate because the suits are some of my favorite. I really like the core suit designs, and I actually even like the mecha. They're not my favorite, but I appreciated the creativity and differences. Coming up, second to bottom, is Geky Ranger, another one people probably won't be surprised by. You know, this is one that often gets a lot of attention and praise because it's something that people will often beeline to when they first get into Sentai out of curiosity, and then you do have like the little bit of a darker take on the Green with Evil arc there, and people will get lips or blood on their lips occasionally, so everyone's like, this is hardcore! It should be on HBO! And it's like, it's not that great. It's really funny actually how similar Geky Ranger and MMP are in the sense that you can boil down most of their plot to the beginning setup, Green Ranger stuff, and then the finale, and like that's it. Like admittedly, there is some better, deeper stuff than MMPR, like the mythology's pretty well thought out. Like I really enjoyed the first handful of episodes, the slow burn of the mythology, but then after that, 90% of the series is filler about following around kids in shorts, which is just disturbing. And it's that least favorite type of filler for me from like the 90s era Sentai, where it's like valueless filler. Like, it's rarely entertaining, and we never learn anything about our characters. They're always following around a filler character. I felt like I didn't get to know any of the cast in this series at all, except for Geky and Barai. You know, I think I remember once they mentioned Goshi as a sister, and that's it. So outside of their base level personalities, I don't remember anything about them. I think there were so many wasted opportunities in the series with story, mythology, and character. Them being from like millions of years ago, I had the perfect opportunity for both some like maybe dramatic stories about them being out of time, and also some just classic fish out of water humor. I did rewatch it a couple years ago for another video series that's like on ice, and I didn't hate it as much, and I tried to find the good in it, and it does have some bright spots, but it's mostly just another like example of some of the worst of Sentai's structure for me. After that, I think this might be a hot take because I think this one is fairly well liked as Mega Ranger. I just felt very similarly about it to Jew Ranger in the sense that I felt that most of the filler, I wasn't really, like, again, filler is an interesting topic when it comes to Sentai and PRs. When I talk about it, I'm very critical of it, and people will often say that's a part of the DNA, and some people like filler, and that's true, I do like filler, I just don't like toku filler. I think it's my least favorite type of filler. I think doing this channel made me realize that. I'm like, I love a good supernatural filler or a good, you know, sitcom filler. I just hate toku filler. It's like grating for me. Especially when it's like a toku filler that is, in my opinion, useless. I think that filler is valuable because you can learn about the characters or the story or, you know, maybe just have a good time, but I felt like most of that filler, like in Mega Ranger and Jew Ranger, was a situation where, like, we didn't learn anything about our characters or see them grow, and I barely remember anything about the Mega Rangers, and they did have some good stuff, like with the Neji Rangers and stuff, but I feel like I was just spent so many years being connected to the Psycho Rangers that it just kind of fell flat for me. You know, I did like some of the early episodes. I liked George Costanza, I liked the Silver Ranger. Maybe it's a series I need to revisit, but it was always one of the most boring for me. After that, a probably even hotter take having this so low on the list is Jetman. This is another series that people beeline to or for a recommendation when new Sentai fans come about, and it's touted like it's this amazing drama, like, again, like, put on HBO. It's like, it's not that great. Like, it's fine. I think the overhype definitely doesn't help. No matter how good something is, I think people overhyping it sets your expectations too high and almost has you resisting it. I think that's currently happening with Andor. God, those Andor fans are obnoxious. Like, it's good, but be cool, baby, damn! But anyway, like, I liked some stuff in it. I liked the cast. You know, I did like some of the sort of romantic stories you kind of get involved in. I liked the aesthetics. You know, it had some good moments, but it also had a lot of boring filler, and it just wasn't that good, to be honest. Not to mention, I hate the ending with Guy just basically bleeding out on a bench, and he could have easily gone to the hospital, and I've had people argue with me saying, well, he didn't want to ruin his friend's wedding day. I'm like, well, his wedding day is going to be ruined when he remembers at every anniversary, like, oh, happy anniversary, honey. Remember when our friend bled out on a bench? After that is Gal Ranger. Now, Gal Ranger, this is pretty low on the list, but it's not like the other three where I have almost a more negative opinion on them. It's just more I didn't connect with it. I liked it. You know, on paper it was pretty good. I think it's another one I need to rewatch, but this is probably a hot take because everyone worships the almighty Sentai, but I just preferred Wild Force. I think the main change I liked with Wild Force was, like, Master Org. I thought was a really interesting, unique wrinkle. But I think, kind of like with Mega Ranger and In Space, I was just so more attached to the PR version that, like, on paper this did good. I just didn't engage with it. Again, I can't think of anything overly negative to say. It's more of a personal thing. It kind of sits as one of those series I've talked about in my previous rankings where I liked it fine, but it doesn't do anything one way or the other to tip the scales either to something I dislike or something I really like. Again, one I probably need to revisit, but I should probably watch the ones I haven't watched first. Next up is GoAnder. GoAnder was one of the series, it started a trend of me like feeling okay about just stopping watching Sentai and like coming back and trying to binge it, as I really love the suits, some of my favorite suits. I love the mecha, I like the concept, but it was just so boring, and I didn't like any of the cast. Honestly, I think Augury's okay. And then eventually I liked Robo Knight, and if I remember right, Datus could be charming once in a while, but most part, I didn't like the cast, I didn't like Alita. It was a grind. And then when I came back, I think when I binged it, it was a little before the Mantarintis arc, and it was overall pretty solid. And I would say now, while I still have some, you know, negative feelings towards it and will take jabs at it, I had a more positive experience with the second half. It definitely improved, becoming much more of a solid series, and I thought they had some really cool stuff going on, like with Braid Jira kind of being behind it. You know, it was Braid Jira all along. So it was one I was able to find some more positives in the end, but still sits rather low for me. After that is King-ohger. King-ohger is another one of those series where I would say this is one where I don't necessarily have a negative opinion of. It's more of a disappointment. Kind of like Gal Ranger in the sense that it's lower on the list, but I don't have anything like I hated it or anything like that. It's just like, I think it had such potential. I actually really quite enjoy the suits. I love the mecha. I thought the mythology and world they set up was pretty interesting, but I felt like they kind of just dropped the ball on it. I remember like starting the series and being really interested to explore more about the world and characters and stuff, and then I felt like they either didn't explore it or like later explanations were like, everything comes from Earth's hope and smile. I'm like, Not to mention, it had this really weird pacing with like storylines of like Duo Bird, where you would have this weird stop and start where the character would show up and it would be like 10 episodes before they pick that story up again, and in between they like never mentioned it. And I don't know, I think it was just a lot of missed potential for me with this series. Like, even at the ending, there was a couple cool twists, but missed potential. And that's kind of where I feel about the series. Like, I don't hate it, I don't love it, I liked a lot about it and thought it had potential, but it just kind of ended up disappointing me in the end. Next up, Zenkaiger. Zenkaiger is a series that's kind of interesting in the sense that, you know, I was worried about it being more silly and light, and it was, and like, not that silly and light is wrong, but like, toku silliness definitely isn't my vibe, and a whole show about that I was worried about, but I wound up enjoying it more than I thought. The thing for me is it just kind of wore out its welcome, not in like an overly negative way, just in the kind of the sense that I was done. Like, it could be a pretty entertaining show in the sense that one of the positives was almost every episode or arc when they tackled the monster of the week, there would be a unique way of fighting it, both in the mecha battle and like on the ground, and it was pretty creative and fun, and I really actually enjoyed myself. It was much more fun than I thought it would be. But at the end of the day, like, I got to a certain point where, again, I wasn't like, oh, I'm hating this. It was more like, I've seen it. Like, I'm done, I'm ready to move on. That's kind of the way I felt about it. And not to mention, you know, despite the fact that of the last 3 Sentai, they were probably the most different looking overall, it was pretty by the number Sentai, and the storyline was very generic. Like, the biggest storyline was Stacy, and I found that to be the most generic, like, rogue hero redemption storyline ever that was just like an amalgam of all the stories I had seen before. But I don't hate Zenkaiger, it's just not my cup of tea, but I can pop in and enjoy it every now and then. Next up, probably a hot take having this low, is ShinkAnder. I just didn't vibe with ShinkAnder as much. I feel like at the time I got caught up in the hype, I was like, yeah, ShinkAnder's great, like, I just wanted to be included, and it's not bad, it's just not my cup of tea. I think I really didn't get into it until like the last arc when things really started firing up. I think it's got great aesthetics and on paper a good story. I just never personally connected with it, and I don't have a whole lot more to say beyond that. Now then is GoAnder. GoAnder was the second Sentai I ever saw, and I'm curious about rewatching it because outside of a couple clips and stuff, and I think movies or something, I haven't revisited it since then. And I'd be curious to see how it sits with me now, because since it was my second ever Sentai series, I hadn't gotten sick of like Sentai and Toku honking its horn in my face. So, like, on paper, this would be a series that would likely maybe annoy me nowadays. But, like, back in the day, I remember being a little disappointed that it wasn't as engaging as Geky Ranger was for me. But I wasn't as cynical, so I was able to enjoy it. And it was more light, it was more funny, it wasn't engaging. But I liked the cast for the most part. I liked the idea of was it the speed droids? Is that right? The engines. What the hell do speed droids come from? The engines, I liked that idea. It kind of felt like Digimon partners. I think it's underrated that engine souls were kind of like the prototype for what rider gimmicks would often become. And I just remember it being a pretty charming series. And I remember it also having, I said also a bunch just then, sorry. But I do remember it having more serialized plot arcs than a lot more of the silly series. And so I have kind of a soft spot for it for being my second Sentai and getting caught up in that excitement of getting to watch it live and stuff like that. But I'd be curious what it would be like on a revisit. Next up is Ryusoulger. This was another series that I did stop watching it because I wasn't vibing with it. I just wasn't engaging with the story and the cast and everything. And when I came back, I did have a much more positive opinion. It wasn't one where I immediately like, oh my god, yes, now it's my favorite. But once I got back, I think it was like a little bit before the Void Knight or the Ryusoulger arc started. And after that, it was just solid. I think I remember like calling my series review like it's a basic Sentai experience, and that's the way I feel about it. Like, I still have some nitpicks and some negatives, but for the most part, it was just kind of an overall decent-ish Sentai that was, once I came back, was enjoyable enough to watch. And I thought it actually had a pretty good and well thought out mythology. Like, I remember there were certain episodes where they were explaining things about how the keys and stuff worked, and I was really impressed with that. And I thought all the stuff with Geky was pretty strong, and an overall pretty decent finale as well. Next up, you have Deca Ranger. This is another series. I have quite a few of them like this that rank at various points in the list, but again, that I like. But I can't think of anything that tips it in the scale of like higher to favorites or lower to not favorites. It's just a series I do like. I always loved the suits and the aesthetics. There was always something kind of exciting and mythical about the suits because not only were they cool, but because it's like we almost got them, it was like stepping into a different world. And it was a breath of fresh air after Geky Ranger, where this series actually did teach you about the characters, and you learned about the characters and you saw them grow a little bit, and there was like an overarching setup story, but also, you know, each character kind of had their own story, so that was a good way of like getting to learn about the characters, but it made it so that there was always something happening in the series. I always just liked it, I just never got super connected to it. However, I do say, I think at least once every few months I think about that weird ending. Then you have Cara Ranger. Cara Ranger, I wasn't sure how it was going to go down for me because it is probably the most silly series because it's effectively a parody, and I really enjoyed myself. I think because I knew going in, it wasn't just a Sentai series like GoAnder or like Boon Boonger might be, where it's just meant to be silly, and like just like a silly toku, and this was like literally just meant to be parodying, so it was a different kind of silly, if that makes sense. It's kind of like the difference between like a bad movie and like Scary Movie. Whereas Scary Movie a great movie? Like, I don't know, it's meant to be kind of so good and bad. Like, scary movies are good movies. Scary movies and all of the original Scary Movie trilogy, no what? Scary Movie 1 through 4 are better than every Sentai on this list. Anyway, I don't know how this got to be about Scary Movie. I see you in the first piece. Which one was I on? Cara Ranger. Cara Ranger, definitely my mileage varied. Get it? Because cars? Ah, thank you. But meaning that, like, sometimes I would watch maybe 1 or 2 episodes and be like, okay, I'm not in the mood for this. But sometimes I'd really be vibing with it and it was a good time. I can't say I remember too much about the characters or the story. I do really like VRV Master, though. That guy was awesome. But I think my favorite thing about it is it was fun and entertaining. But I think my favorite thing about the parody aspect was the way they presented the mythology. Like, they presented it in this way that the characters were taking it so seriously, but in a way that was clearly making fun of the way Sentai will take mythology seriously that are ridiculous. Because you would get another Sentai series where they would introduce a totally balls nuts mythology that was stupid, but the characters are legit taking it seriously. But in Cara Ranger, within the universe, the characters were taking it seriously, but in a way that it was clear to the audience it was a joke, if that makes any sense. And I think that was my favorite thing. But I kind of have a soft spot for it. It was a more fun time than I was expecting. Also, Scary Movie. You have Deca Ranger. Deca Ranger, similar to Dai Ranger, a series that I like, but I don't necessarily have strong emotions to one way or the other. I do like the cast, I like the concept, I like the aesthetic. I kind of both like the almost procedural feel of it, but also it didn't have a serialized story, so I wasn't as engaged with it. So I don't like it as much as a lot of people just because it is a fairly popular one, but I don't hate it either. We have Dawn Brothers, a more recent entry. I really like this series. It was definitely not perfect, it was a little bit mixed, but I thought it was kind of funny, like I said, that GoAnder was even more different looking than this, and that one was more traditional Sentai than I thought, but this was the first Sentai, for me, that I can really think of that truly changed up the formula in the way the Sentai is structured, feeling more like a drama, even evoking some writer vibes in the way the villains were structured. I felt they did a good job of fleshing out all the characters. We didn't get as much answers about the mythology as I would have liked, but I just really quite enjoyed this series for the most part overall, sans a couple nitpicks from some things about the mythology and Zenkaiser Black. Like, I know ultimately it's kind of meant to be a joke, I guess, but I think there was some really, like, missed potential there, and I really hated what they did with Don Goku, but for the most part it was a positive experience. Then you have Toki, another on the list of series that I stopped watching, and I think of the ones I've talked about so far, this was the one where I walked away after coming back and binging that I had the most positive. Like, with Ryu Soldier, it was kind of like, I'm not vibing this, but now I like it okay. With GoAnder, I'm like, I still don't care for it, but at least the last bit was fine. This was like, I'm a fan now. I actually have quite a fondness for this series. Like, I think once you understand what's going on with the imagination and the fact that they're all kids, and then when I came back, it really got going, and like the villains are really good. Once you start vibing with it, I just really liked it. I thought it was a special series. I felt really invested, like, emotionally in the finale, like when, you know, they all go back to their lives. I was even excited to see them back in their Returns movie. It's kind of like one of those series, it's kind of a weird example, but like, you know, Parks and Rec and The Office are both series where the first seasons are notoriously hard to get through, but once you like get into the series and you go back and rewatch them, in my opinion, it's easier to rewatch those first seasons once you're into it. And that's kind of the way I feel about this, is now like I'm able to appreciate the series more overall once I got into it. Then you have Hurricaneger. I have a soft spot for Hurricaneger, definitely a fondness for that. Second Sentai series I ever completed. You know, when I first started watching Sentai, I was live during Geky Ranger, and then I kind of sampled a bunch of series, and there weren't a whole lot that were fully available. Like, I was only able to watch the first handful of Geky Ranger and Mega Ranger, but Hurricaneger was available all on Daily Motion with those old HK subs. I still want to rewatch it with, like, proper subs, but I really enjoyed it. You know, obviously because it started Ninja Storm, but it very much reminded me of, I think Ninja Storm took the best parts of Hurricaneger in the sense that it has a very fun quirkiness and silliness to it, but when it wants me to take the plot seriously and be invested in what's going on with the story and characters, I can. I think it had a lot of charm, it had a great cast. I'll be interested to see if it moves up or down when I rewatch it, but for now, it's always going to hold a little bit of a special place for me. Next up with an interesting entry is Lupat. Now, this is an interesting series because on paper, it does a lot of things that would usually put me off, which one of them is one of my core problems that Joer had, is it had that similar problem of stopping and starting the plot, namely with like that ice villain guy. He was like the duo bird of this series, where he would show up and then you wouldn't mention him for a really long time, like not even mention him. Like he wouldn't show up, but it's like you could just skip all the episodes in between. It's like you missed nothing. They had a really hard time with that, and it's also very episodic. But I think what saved it for me, like Deca Ranger was very episodic, but I wasn't into it because there wasn't as much in the overall story. The reason I invested in the series so much was the characters. I just love the casts. I love seeing the casts interact. Almost every episode enjoyable, because again, like I said when I was criticizing those fillers in like Geky Ranger and Mega Ranger, it's like, I don't care about this dumbass toku filler character we're following around. I want to learn more about our characters, whether it's them evolving or, you know, tracking a new bond between characters or learning something about them. And that was the way I felt about Lupat. Almost every episode either did contribute to the story, I felt like I spent valuable time with one of the characters, it maybe furthered one of the bonds or dynamics, and I just remember really enjoying it. And like, I had my nitpicks, like I said, about the pacing and the episodicness, and I felt the storyline with Lupin X being an alien was just like, why? That was like just so unneeded. I think that's why it holds a little bit of a special place for me as well, because I really did enjoy it, and I think, like, despite my many criticisms, like, my positives outweighed the negatives, which is pretty rare for me. Next up is Geky Ranger. This was also another series I finished fairly early on, and I really just love the vibe of this series. You know, I think I've brought this up when I previously have discussed the show, but every Sentai, like, has its own thought-out mythology and world, with some feeling more fleshed out than others, and I think this has one of the most fleshed out mythologies where you could see it being its own spin-off series of stuff, and I really like the uniqueness of having the family dynamic. I thought it was just an overall really good, solid, engrossing Sentai. For its tentative placement right now is King-ohger. It's just like cracking like near the top 10. I think that's good placement for it because right now I definitely see it being a top series. But like it's just, again, the recency bias will have it ranking higher, but also it's too recent for me to know if like it's going to mean as much to me as any of the other series higher up. Like it can't break through the attachment I have to any of the other ones on this list, and I don't see that changing until I sit with the series for like, you know, at least a few more months after it ends. But as you know, I'll just keep this brief because I've been covering the series regularly. King-ohger's been great. Again, structurally, breath of fresh air. When Dawn Brothers was about to end, I said, I really hope they continue this like structure change, not in the sense that they copy Dawn Brothers' structure, but don't go back to Sentai's boring formula, and they have their own unique structure, great characters and thought-out mythology, very, very little filler. Almost every episode contributes. Like, again, if you just watch my weekly reviews, you know how much I love this series, and I'll go like more in detail when I do a ranking when I have this more in a solidified place, but this feels like a right place where it would probably rank even after it's finished. After that is Geky Ranger. Geky Ranger, I watched once long ago, and I remember liking it alright, I guess, but then I rewatched it, I think 2-3 years ago, and I really enjoyed this series. I also think it's funny that we don't have a single just kind of normal, middle-of-the-road ninja Sentai. They're all like weird and quirky. But this is a cool series. It's got a great cast, kind of reminds me of Deca Ranger in the sense that you have an overall story idea, but then you do have individual character stories, but I think it comes together a little bit better. But I felt like I really got to know all the characters. I enjoyed the world. I enjoyed some of their unique structure, where I almost forgot about this until someone was comparing it to the way King-ohger did their like season 2 start over. That you had the second mini arc in the second half of the series where you had them all having their individual stories when they got the scrolls for their new mecha, and it still trips me up that Muteki Shogun is the main primary Megazord of that series. To me, it always, in my head, is the second Megazord. Kind of like how the White Ranger just looks more right with the MMPR suits to me from my child conditioning. But yeah, I really like this series. It's also similar to Auber Ranger, a series that I feel includes a lot of sampler platter of Sentai's various tones. You know, silly, funny, heartwarming, dramatic, all that. You have Geky Ranger. Geky Ranger got a lot of talk recently, you know, the second coming of the Gokaiger fans not shutting up about stuff, but I really do like Geky Ranger. I was very excited for it when it started because I liked the aesthetics and the large number of Rangers. Had a hard time getting into it at first. Actually, I think I almost thought about dropping it, but I didn't. And then it wound up being really good. Once it takes off, it's actually fairly serialized, to be honest with you, and it had a lot of twists and turns where it went where I didn't think it was going to go. It didn't maybe necessarily stick some of the ending twists, but I still overall enjoyed it. Not to mention I really liked the cast. I think they did a good job of, you know, even though certain cast members are going to get more attention than others, that I still remember each of the cast personalities, you know, and I don't think Lucky gets enough credit for actually maturing, and this is coming from someone who will take any opportunity to hate on obnoxious Sentai Reds. Like just any on the street, like, oh, how you doing? Nice to meet you. My name's Awesome. I hate Sentai Reds. But so, like, I hate those type of characters, but he actually, over the course of the series, mellowed out a little bit. He wasn't as obnoxious because he kind of went through some stuff, and like when he said his catchphrase, then it had meaning, and I don't see a lot of people giving him credit for that. Next up is Shyu. This one has fallen in the ranks a little bit over the years, but that's only because There's other series that I'm just more personally fond of. This is a great Sentai series. Also another one that's in a lot of ways a good catch-all of like the tones of like silliness, bright, colorfulness, but engaging plot and characters. You know, I really like the aesthetics, I like the vibe of it, like how they were able to incorporate like silly stuff like the melody and make it like serious within the mythology and also for moving character moments. Another series with a lot of characters, and even though I think people blow the Daigo focus way out of proportion, also, it feels like even though they had a large cast, I remember distinctly all of them. I'm not saying Daigo didn't get a lot of focus, but I'm saying in a series where a character like that got a lot of focus, I still distinctly remember the whole cast. And it also had this really great thing where like every time, or not every time, but a lot of the times I'd see an episode preview and it would look like a filler and then it would be like an amazing episode. But yeah, it's a really great series. It's just one that isn't as special to me as someone's higher on the list. Speaking of his GoAnder, I do think GoAnder is... I think Kyoryuger, rather, is better than GoAnder. I just have a soft spot for GoAnder. I've always liked the suits, and, you know, it was a series that took me a while to get into, but then once I did, I really vibed with it. Another series where I feel, outside of the core setup, a lot of the story was about the individual characters' stories, and I don't know, I just really vibed with the show, and I tend to have a bit of a special place and like a soft spot for toku series or series where it's harder to get into, but then once you do, you feel kind of rewarded for sticking with it, and it kind of creates more of a bond with the series, and I've always just kind of had a soft spot for it, which is why it's a little bit higher, even though I do think, technically speaking, Kyoryuger's better. After that is Auber Ranger. Again, I just talked about Auber Ranger a couple times, so I think it's a really good catch-all of like, it has a really interesting mythology in my opinion, it has great characters, like some really dramatic character moments, some serious character moments, some dark character moments, some heartwarming character moments, but then you absolutely go like balls nuts crazy with the like the wigs and the silliness. Doesn't always land for me, but it definitely gives the series its own unique vibe, and I really like it. And I hesitate to say it's underrated anymore because it has gotten a lot of attention, especially you know, with the movie and stuff like that. But I still feel that it sometimes is overlooked because people beeline for Geky Ranger because of MMPR. Kyoryuger is mega popular, as we're seeing it's getting more attention now, and I think Re-Soldier has just gotten a lot of focus recently because of Dino Fury. But yeah, I really love Auber Ranger. Next up, and this is cracking my tops here now, is Cara Major. Now, this is a good example of kind of what I was talking about with why King-ohger's placement would be tentative, regardless if it finished, because Cara Major was a series that while I really, really liked it, when I would rank Cara Major like within the first month after it ended, it wouldn't crack the tops just because I didn't have enough time to fully think about how much the series meant to me or whatever, or where to crack the top 5. But now after a long time, it definitely has cracked the top series. You know, Cara Major was just a damn solid show. And it was one that I had kind of the most base level excitement for going in. Like, yeah, another Sentai looks fine. But I just really wound up liking it. I mean, I really do love the suits, both the mecha and the Ranger suits, but then they kind of physically represent the way I feel about the show overall, as it feels like a good classic Sentai, but also something a little bit different and new. And it really felt like Sentai when I first got into Sentai, if that makes any sense. Kind of like with Rider, I talk about how Gaim had that Rider mood. Sentai's mood didn't have as much of a drastic change because it's always bounced around from silly and stuff like that. But this just had something about this just solid, engaging feel and this vibe that I got when I first got into Sentai before it got a little bit more of a tendency to lean towards the more wacky and obnoxious. And I just loved the characters and the world. Another series where they surprised me with Juru, where I remember the trailer and I'm like, another twerp red, but then he wound up being great. I thought he was a great character, especially since they actually gave you reason in the show. Like, they showed you all over the show why this character is the lead and why he's special, because like I said, very often than not, like in Sentai and Rider, the character will be like, potatoes are the power of Earth's hope! And they're like, that's why he's leader. I'm like, he just said nothing and screamed in your face. Why is he leader? But Cara Major actually showed why the quirky guy's quirks were important to being the lead character. Now, coming with the top 3 is Geky Ranger. You know, Geky Ranger, a very much talked about series. Sometimes overhyped, not in the sense that it's bad, like secretly, like not as good, I mean, but in the sense that it's like, man, just be cool, baby, damn! But Geky Ranger really is great, and I've talked about it like so many times that of course, it's a great anniversary series. You know, it did the whole changing into past heroes thing and other gimmicks with the anniversary, like the mecha, which at the time was special before we started running these ideas into the ground. But not only is that cool, but of course you have the cameos, and not just cameos, but almost all the cameos were meaningful, either to playing tribute to the series itself that they come from, or into furthering Geky Ranger's story. But all that aside, it was just a solid Sentai setup in general. That's one of my favorite things about it, is the Geky Ranger's story wasn't, you know, an afterthought. I loved the characters in their own story. They had their own aesthetic. They didn't feel like they were just there to be a template to celebrate the anniversary. I think that's what makes it so good. Kind of like Dino Thunder, I said, that Dino Thunder, if you took Tommy out, it would be a solid series all on its own. Like, the Tommy stuff is just icing on top. That's the way I feel about this. Even though the anniversary stuff is obviously a huge part of it, but I feel that you could totally work this into a damn solid Sentai series without the anniversary, and the anniversary is just like extra treat. Now, For my top 2, coming at the runner-up spot, I find it funny that the runner-up spot on both my Rider and Sentai list is my first series, which is Geky Ranger. You know, obviously I'm always going to have fondness for this for starting my Sentai fandom. You know, I still think it's a damn solid series, another series that has a pretty well thought out mythology, pretty great cast of characters, some really great villains, great progression overall. Another series where I'm curious to see how I would feel about John when I rewatched it, because this was before the obnoxious toku leads crushed my spirit. He's definitely one of those types. I felt he made a little more sense because he was like raised in the jungle and he wasn't just an absolute thundering loony that just existed in society for no reason. And also, I did feel he matured a little bit over the course of the series, and I did kind of like his Johnisms at the time. I'm curious to see how I feel about it now, but regardless, I do love this show. I think it's a damn solid Sentai series that I'm always going to have in my tops for fondness reasons. But number 1 for me is Gobbusters. You know, this series was so great. A series that was underrated for a very long time. It got a lot of attention later when people were acting like they were fans the whole time when Beast Morphers was announced. But people basically didn't want to give the series a chance because it wasn't Gokaiger. But I thought it was great. Loved the suits from the get-go. I loved how slick they look, how different. This was another series that was structurally different as well. I mean, it definitely had some of that classic Sentai structure, but you would very often have times where you would have mecha battles and ground battles happening at the same time and stuff like that, which was a refreshing change of pace. Great story that I was invested in, great characters, especially the core 3. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Jin and Jay. I think they're a great example of, like, one of my recent complaints is that I feel like most Six Rangers nowadays are just a cartoon bit, and they're a good mix of, like, they have that funny, quirky bit, but they also feel like real characters, and Jay is amazing. But the core 3 especially, I mean, they're not as good as the core 4 from Scream, but the core 3, I think what was most interesting about them is how all of their lives were affected differently based on how old they were when their Begins night happened. I think it's funny that, like, because of Kamen Rider Double, every time there's some sort of pivotal flashback night, I just call it a Begins night. But, you know, because, like, Yoko was really young when it happened, Ryuji was already, like, old enough to, like, form his own identity and, like, his own dreams. So it's like all Yoko knew, I think Yoko was her name, Yellow regardless, all she knew was being a Go-Buster. But Ryuji, like, he knew what it was like to have normal life. So I thought that was interesting. Not to mention some of the best villains in the series, and probably still my favorite Sentai villain of all time with Enter. I did feel that, like, there was some awkward pacing at the end where very much reminded me of Build. It felt like the writers knew what they wanted to do, but, like, they still had extra episodes left, so they had to come up with some extra stuff to be done. But other than that, it's still just a top tier Sentai for me. But that is just my list. Let me know your guys' favorite Sentai in the comments as always. Like I said, I will update this list down the road, you know, after King-ohger's fully over, and after I finally close that gap of those 3 Sentai series, so I can say at least I've seen all the ones that PR has adapted. But until next time, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and climb the steps and ring that bell so you get notifications for my videos. Dawson Rider, signing out.